Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the latest episode of the Stephen King podcast. This is another bonus episode, and this is bonus episode number 39. And buckle in, folks. We're in for a treat here because this is going to be horror, and horror is what you're at. Our guest, Rich Davis, is your man, and specifically, it's going to be interesting because he does comic books, and he does a very famous comic book figure. So, Rich, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your Cult of Dracula series?
Yeah. Hey, Lou, thank you so much for having me on the show. It's been, it's really cool to be here chatting with you. So my name's Rich Davis, and I am the writer and creator of Cult of Dracula from Source Point Press. Issue 4 comes out on next Wednesday. So the 30th of June. And it's a six issue miniseries that will run through August from Source Point Press. You can find it in comic book stores all over the world. It's been one of the best-selling comics in Source Point Press history. We've broken a lot of sales records, and thankfully, audiences are picking it up and really responding to it, which is very humbling and really cool at the same time.
I bet that's great. So you are the writer for this series, correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So what's your background? How did you come to get to this point in your life? Were you an avid reader, etc.? Were you always wanted to be a writer, or is that something that came to you lately, or how did that all evolve for you?
I like to say that I came to writing late in life through a series of happy accidents. I've done a lot of things in my life. I've worked in radio as an on-air personality. I owned a theater, owned a bar. I own a comic book store. I've been a stuntman in film and theater. I've been film crew. I've worked for 2 presidential campaigns and 1 senatorial campaign. So my life may have lacked focus, but it's never been boring. And so now I've ended up writing comics. I'm very, very humbled and very grateful for the opportunities that I've had with Source Point Press. And, I've always been, since I was a kid, I've been a very avid reader. I didn't always start that way, though.
Okay.
When I was a little kid, probably around 9, 10 years old, I didn't like to read. All I wanted to do was play baseball and play video games. My parents were very clever, and so they tricked me into developing a love for reading because they started buying me comic books as a reward anytime I did well in school, or if I did all my chores, or if I played well in one of my baseball games. They would buy me comic books, and my little kid brain didn't make the connection that comic books were reading. I just thought they were fun and didn't realize that I was reading a book. But from there, I became an avid comic reader, and that developed into young adult novels, and then novels that were way too adult for me to be reading as a 12-year-old kid. And now, to this day, I'm an avid reader. I read every day, and I love to read.
Very good.
And that wouldn't have happened if my parents hadn't thought outside the box and tricked me when I was a kid.
Alrighty. And what kind of books do you like to read?
I love horror. I'm a huge horror fan. I have been a Stephen King fan as far back as I can remember. I remember I bought Eyes of the Dragon at a school book fair. I was in middle school. I have no idea why that book was in a middle school book fair, but there it was. And I picked it up and read it, and I loved it. And I went, and from there I read it. Didn't understand half of it, but I loved it. And then I read The Stand, which was way too advanced for me to get one as a little, 12, 13-year-old kid.
Right.
Now, I've since gone back and read all of those books multiple times, and I understand more of them every single time. But, I was reading them way too early. I love Anne Rice. I've read everything she's written, including her Sleeping Beauty books. There was a time in my life I couldn't get enough Anne Rice. Everything she put out, I just wanted to consume it. I love anything by Neil Gaiman, George R. Martin. I do enjoy the fantasy books quite a bit.
Okay.
I'm a fan of Kurt Vonnegut, read a lot, and Jules Verne, a lot of sci-fi. And I really enjoy reading history books, alternate history, real history. And, you know, I just really love to read. I read all the time. And, you know, you always hear the old saying, you know, a writer should read 10 times as much as he writes. And I think I try to get as close to that as possible.
Okay. Very cool. So you're fairly well read. Yeah. From the sounds of it, a lot of genre stuff there. So was there any writing during that time? Did you ever have that urge, or did that come just when you did? Is it the comic book store that it was the last thing you did? Or do you still have that?
I still own Nirvana Comics in Knoxville, Tennessee. I'm not actively as involved day to day as I was. I've kind of turned the reins over to my store manager and my business partner. And I still own the store. I'm still there, but most of my time lately is spent writing and promoting Cult of Dracula. I guess I would say the desire to write has always been there, because I can remember as far back being in middle school and trying, you know, wanting to write stories. And I really enjoyed my creative writing classes and English classes because they gave me the opportunity to write. Okay. But I never really had the courage to think that I could do this for a living until I was much older, into adulthood. Stan Lee didn't start writing comics until he was 40. J.K. Rowling, she was a secretary until she was like 42 or 43 years old. So I don't think it's ever too late in life to start writing. And I was well into adulthood before I really decided to make a go of this.
Okay. So is this Cult of Dracula, is this your first stab at writing then?
It is. Well, it's my first stab at writing a comic book. I've written plays and screenplays and things like that in the past. You know, nothing that would ever make me famous. Things that really no one saw outside of my own theater. It was called the Brown Coat Pub and Theater. Okay. And we produced original plays by emerging artists in the southeastern North Carolina region. So, you know, little things like that. But Cult of Dracula is the first time I have been bold enough to share my writing with a wide audience. And I'm very thankful that that audience has been very receptive and open to reading what I've written.
Okay. And why did you choose Dracula?
I have been obsessed with Dracula since I was a kid. I remember they used to air, though sometimes they would air the Bela Lugosi, but most of the time it was the Christopher Lee Hammer films. When I was a kid, there was this little television station out of Nashville, Tennessee. Back then, my parents, they didn't have cable. It was like, we got like 6 channels, and on Friday nights, I would get to stay up late. My dad would let me stay up late and watch this channel. And they was, you know, kind of like the old, you know, they used to do like the Elvira horror movies of the week. It wasn't exactly that, but it was very similar. Right. And I just became obsessed with the character of Dracula because he scared me in a way that very few things scared me. And it was really his ability to manipulate people into doing things for him. It wasn't necessarily what he did himself, but it was what other people would do for him. Right. And then in my teenage years, I discovered the Bram Stoker's Dracula, directed by Francis Ford Coppola. And that is still to this day my favorite adaptation of Dracula. It is an incredible film. Some of the technology, the CGI and things don't hold up to today's standards, but it was a very ambitious and very frightening film when it first came out. Like I still have the image of Lucy in that red dress walking through the garden in that storm. I mean, it is burned into my brain. Yeah. So, you know, that obsession's always been there with Dracula and vampires in general.
Right. Hence why you got into Anne Rice so deeply.
Yes.
Yeah, I can totally relate to that. I have 2 vampire memories, a bit older than you, or quite a bit actually. So my first real exposure to vampires was an ABC movie of the week, TV movie of the week, and that was with Carl Kolchak and The Night Stalker. And I had never seen anything.
That's amazing.
And I was scared, shitless. And you have to remember, this was back in the 70s. You just didn't see this kind of stuff on primetime TV. And now I watch it again with great fondness, but it's pretty tame
by today's standards,
for this time. Yeah. And the same thing with the Salem's Lot miniseries.
Oh my God.
The scene with Danny Glick at the window.
My goodness. I still to this day have nightmares about that. That was so well done. I cannot to this day walk through the woods at night without getting creeped out. It chills me to the bone. And they did another adaptation of Salem's Lot on TNT.
Oh, yeah. Horrible.
Yeah, it didn't quite hold up the same way. God, that original is terrifying.
And that window scene still works. Like it's it's all practical, but because they ran the film backwards, and I think he was on a boom or something like that, so it's pretty seamless, and it still works. It's I
love it.
It's one of those childhood memories that's just embedded in my brain.
Yes,
so I totally get you. I totally get you with the Dracula picture. Okay, so you picked. It seems very obvious why you picked Dracula, that you wanted to do this first foray into comic books. I haven't really interviewed that many comic book writers, so that form is very specialized. Even like writing a short story or a novel is one thing, writing a screenplay is another. Comic books are very probably the most condensed format out of all the types of writing that one could try. How did you find that? Because I don't know how many panels you were allowed to use, and did you know that ahead of time, or did you just write the whole story and then cut back? How did that work out for you?
It's writing a comic book can be an insanely complex process, but also a very simple process at the same time. And I'm very fortunate. I came from a background in theater and film.
Right.
So I was familiar with writing a play script and writing a screenplay. And I need to preface this by saying that I'm not saying this is the right way to write a comic book script. I'm saying this is my way to write a comic book script, because there's really one thing I learned from reading from a lot of people, a lot of great comics creators who are much more important than me, is that there's really no right or wrong way to write a script. All you do is you write a script. But for me, what worked was treating it like a screenplay. And because in both of those genres, you're writing in pictures.
Right.
When you're writing a screenplay, you're writing in such a way that the director of photography can interpret your words into a picture within the frame of the camera.
Right.
When you're writing a comic book, you're writing in such a way that your artist can interpret your words in the frame of a comic book panel. So my scripts look very, very similar to a screenplay. I'll open up with a scene, page 1, 5 panels, exterior, cemetery at night. And then, it'll be 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, 1.4, 1.5. And I'll write a description of what the reader would be seeing. And I try to do it in such a way that I'm telling a story so that my artist is entertained while he's reading it. I try not to be, perfunctory and just too descriptive. I like to leave a little bit of artistic license.
Right.
For Puis to work with, because I want him to put his stamp on this as well. I don't want to stifle his creativity at all. And it works very well. He's able to take the things that I write and make them into absolutely gorgeous pictures. And it can be very complicated, or it can be very, very simple. And I'm very fortunate that I'm working with some amazing artists who understand what in the hell I've written down on these pages and can turn them into really pretty pictures.
Okay. So is there like a back and forth, or do you do the script first, or does the artist do you lay out this arc of the story and say this is roughly what the story's going to be, and then he does some drawings and then you fine tune the script, or is it pretty well you just give him a script and he does the drawings and then maybe there's some slight changes, or how did that work for you?
So what I do, I begin by writing an outline of the general issue, the high points, A, B, and C plots. We're going from here to here to here. And I usually share that with the artist first, so he has an idea of what to expect.
Right.
And then I go and I write the entire script.
Right.
You know, I go through, I'll write anywhere. A comic script is usually anywhere from 22 to 28 pages. Sometimes I infuriate my publisher because I'll insist on doing, 32 pages or something, because I just can't end the story. But from there, that script goes to, after that, it becomes a very collaborative process. It goes to the artist, Puis Calzada. He came on in issue number 3, and we began working together.
Okay.
So it goes to Puis, and he draws the panels. He draws them in pencil, and he'll send them to me to look at, and I'll suggest some changes if necessary. But Puis and I have developed a great relationship to where I really don't have to make many suggestions to him because we're working so well together. He just gets what I'm expecting to see. And then from there, once I approve the pencils, he'll go back in and ink it.
Right.
And, add the shading and the depth. And then from there, we send it over to our colorist. She turns it into beautiful full color and sometimes completely changes the look of a page in wonderful ways. And then from there, it goes to the letterer, and he puts all of the dialogue and the sound effects and things like that onto the page. And then it goes to the editor and then off to the publisher.
So at the beginning of the project, then, do you is this a collaborative effort, or do you have final say on the look and the tone of the characters and whatnot? Like, did you ask for character designs and say, I like this, or I want them to look like this, or whatnot? Like, how does that work?
Yeah. So this is a creator-owned property.
Okay. So
I have final artistic approval on everything with the book. But when Puis and I started working together, he had to come on because our original artist, Henry Martinez, his family was impacted by COVID and he couldn't continue with the project. So we switched artists in issue 3 to Puis Calzada. And Puis and I didn't have a lot of time to go through that process of character designs. It was really based on I feel bad actually, because I had to dictate to him what the characters should look like and what all this. And I don't feel like he had as much creative input as he deserved in the beginning. Okay. Now, as we shift from Cult of Dracula into the next volume, Rise of Dracula, we've got a lot more time, and we're going to be introducing some new characters. And so Puis and I, we're gonna sit down and we're going to talk about the characters, what their costumes should look like, how they should look, we'll have more of an opportunity to collaborate fully in the planning stages, because that's really how I prefer to work. I love to work collaboratively because I believe anything that Puis and I can design together is going to be better than everything we could think of apart. Right. And the better relationship we have and the more in sync we are, the more entertaining it's going to be for the reader. Right. So I definitely prefer the collaborative approach to the kind of dictatorial thing. Right, right. And just generally, because you're a writer and he's an artist, he'll have ideas that you wouldn't have the language to convey to him. So he would probably just absolutely intuits that from your comments or description and whatnot. So absolutely. And I've gotten a lot more confident from writing the script for Cult of Dracula #1 to now. Cult of Dracula 6 is going to be sent to the printers this month. But in the beginning, I was terrified to make any suggestions to the artist, because originally I was working with Henry Martinez, and Henry, he'd worked for Marvel. He'd drawn Ghost Rider and Spirits of Vengeance. And here I am, just an absolute nobody. So I was like, who am I to tell this guy how to draw a page? And I was terrified to make the smallest suggestion. But I learned and got more confident, and from working with Henry, and Henry was very kind to kind of mentor me along, share with me his experiences and his approaches. And it helped me develop my own confidence. So now when I'm writing the scripts for Puis, I'll always bold it and put it in brackets. I'll go down. I'm like, I'm listening to a metal version of 99 Luftballons while I'm writing this scene. And I'll say,
Yeah.
I'll write something. I'll say, yes, that's a total Buffy the Vampire Slayer reference. Rock it how you want. And I'm making I'm much more confident and I hope to someday put the scripts online for people to look at, maybe on a website or something like that, so that they can see how I evolved from being this timid writer to being just this insane person who goes into way too much detail, things that the reader is never going to see. I mean, we have so many Easter eggs and horror movie references buried in these books. And Puis and I, we have these great little side notes to each other. And I think that stuff's very entertaining will be to some readers who are interested in kind of how the sausage is made. So I hope to be able to share those scripts someday.
Oh, okay. Very cool. I'll probably have some more questions about your writing process, but a creative process. But let's turn the focus now to the actual series itself.
Okay.
You've got this Cult of Dracula, and your inspiration is obviously Dracula. How heavily do you lean into that, and what's different about your series? Like, what time period does it take place in, and things of that nature?
Cult of Dracula is very similar to Stoker's Dracula, but also radically different at the same time. What I set out to do when I decided to tackle the most adapted horror novel in history, I wanted to set it in a modern day, and I wanted it to be a reimagining of the story. So I tried to think of where would Stoker have placed his characters today?
Right.
Who would Jonathan Harker be in a world where everything he did was on Twitter? How would that change? How would that change the story?
Right.
I didn't want to do another Victorian setting, because we've seen Dracula in the Victorian era every possible way that we can see it. There's nothing else you can do with that character in that time period. And I didn't want it to be a sequel to Dracula, like, okay, this is Dracula 100 years after the story we all know and love, because that's been done a million times.
Right.
So what I really wanted to try to do was to reimagine it and to make it a real modern day horror story. A good friend of mine named Rob Mann, from my days in theater, we had a conversation one time when he was directing a stage adaptation of Dracula, and he was lamenting the fact that there is no such thing as a good Dracula script for the stage, because the things that were frightening to the Victorian society are no longer frightening today. We've moved on. We've seen those things. We've made fun of those things. I mean, hell, we've seen Leslie Nielsen play Dracula and be a total buffoon.
Right.
So we've laughed at this character so much and seen him presented in so many ways that he's not scary anymore. So I started researching Bram Stoker and, the influences that he drew from, and the themes and the ideas that he wanted to tackle. And I tried to create something similar, but was also completely different. So the first idea I had was to focus less on the character of Dracula and more on the cult of worshipers that surround him and the things that they're willing to do for him. Another character that from my childhood that terrifies me to this day is Charles Manson.
Yeah.
I remember watching the Helter Skelter movie when I was a kid, and I cannot remember the actor's name right now, but his eyes were just so scary.
Yeah.
Manson was another figure very similar to a vampire, because he never, we don't know that he ever actually killed someone or anyone, but he convinced high school football stars, cheerleaders, prom queens. He convinced them to do horrible, horrible things. I mean, they ripped a baby out of a pregnant woman's belly for him because he told them to. And so with those two terrifying ideas in mind, it just made sense to bring Dracula and Manson together. And so that's how we came up with the basic concept for Cult of Dracula. It's a reimagining of Stoker's original tale set within a Manson family inspired cult dedicated to an ancient blood goddess. That's the other major change that we make to the Stoker mythos. And I think how we push the vampire genre forward, because I believe if you're going to do something like this, it needs to be something that advances or changes the mythology in an important way. Otherwise, the reader should just go read 30 Days of Night or some of the other amazing vampire books that are out there.
Right.
I wanted to give them a reason to come to Cult of Dracula and try to kind of walk around in my universe for a while. So I started doing research into world religions and folklore and scary stories and children's nursery rhymes, which children's nursery rhymes, if you ever actually start researching them, they are really messed up. They are so scary.
Yes.
And when you get into the origins of them. And so I started noticing in all of these things that I was reading, there's this common figure that shows up. It doesn't matter what time period, what culture, what religion, whatever. This one figure is common throughout human history. It's always a woman. She's outcast, lives on the fringes of society. She stalks the darkness and lives in the shadows and steals naughty children from their beds and survives by consuming their innocence or their essence or their blood.
Right.
And, it goes all the way, the Wendigo, La Llorona, Baba Yaga, Lamia, Lamashtu, all of these characters, every culture that's ever walked the earth seems to have this figure in their mythology, and go all the way back to Lilith in the original Talmud and Midrashic texts. Her story being, everybody knows the story that Lilith, Adam's first wife, and she left Eden because she wouldn't submit to Adam. But very few people have bothered to go further and read the Midrashic texts and the Islamic versions and the Talmud, where they talk about what happens to Lilith after she leaves the garden. And, she, making a long story short, she goes and lives in this cave. God sends 3 angels to go and say, hey, all is forgiven. If you want to come back, come back. So the angels go, and Lilith says, no, I'm good. I like my life. I'm going to live here in this cave and do my thing.
Right.
And the angels get pissed because the original angels from the Talmud and those ancient books, they were jerks. They hated humans and they were jealous of humans. And so one of the angels loses his temper and he curses Lilith and he says, okay, fine, you arrogant bitch, you reject God's offer. The only way you can survive is by consuming the blood of 1,000 of your children every day. And that was their curse.
Right.
And when I read that story, it just clicked. That's the first Dracula.
Wow.
That is the first vampire, Lilith. And so I started going down this rabbit hole of every version of Dracula that any culture has ever seen was real. That was Dracula. What changed was the person's perception. Sometimes where we are when we see something is just as important as what we see.
Right.
So the Native Americans, when they saw this vampire stalking the darkness, stealing children, they saw the Wendigo. Yeah, the ancient Greeks, they saw the Lamia, and so on and so forth throughout all of these cultures. And so once I had that linchpin connected to the cult that was worshiping this figure, the whole story just came together. And so we get to play with all of these different versions of Dracula in the story. I mean, we go all the way back to the Garden of Eden. We visit all kinds of other cultures and time periods, and we see how she's been interpreted over and over again. And it makes the story work so well. And I think it tackles a very core fear that we have in the modern world. And maybe it's a fear we've had throughout human history, but for some reason today, in this day and age, we are terrified of women. We're terrified of strong, powerful women. So it was a way of playing with Stoker's fear of the other, but instead of the other being a foreigner, I made the other a woman, something different from, let's face it, most comic book readers, not all, but most comic book readers are male. So the other to them is a woman. And so I try to tackle the things that those men fear in women, and I try to present those in a way that makes sense narratively, but also, kind of stabs them to the bone and scares them.
Wow, that's a lot of research for a comic book, and I don't mean to be glib about it, but no, most people would not put that much thought into it, or readers would not think that creatives would be putting that much work into a comic book. Like you did a lot of research, man.
Yeah, I kind of I do so much research. Yeah, I have so many pages of notes and research, things that will never, ever, ever be relevant to the person reading the book.
Right.
They'll never know. They'll never know 90% of what I've researched here, but it's important for me because it helps me to create a living world with living, breathing characters who react.
Yep.
I think from my theater days, I learned that if you want to create a believable character on stage, that character has to have a believable life. Like the character just doesn't magically exist the moment you step onto the stage. He had a moment before, and he had a moment before that, and a moment before that. He has a life. So yeah, I do a lot of research to develop and flesh out the characters. And also I do a lot of research because if I'm tackling something like Dracula and I'm writing for both comic book readers and horror fans, and those are two of the most rabid and devoted fans on the planet. And if I screw something up, if I put, if I put some kind of metal that humans hadn't discovered till 300 years after my page was set, some comic book fan or some horror fan is going to read that and they're going to point it out to me. So for my own protection from Twitter and Reddit, I try to research everything I can before I put it in the script. And that's especially relevant in issue number 3, when you start to see, we have our first big flashback. We go back to the bootlegging era of rural Appalachia. And I wanted to make sure that all of the cars that I used were period accurate, and right down to this scene is set on Copperhead Road that connected Johnson City, Tennessee to Knoxville, Tennessee. It was a big bootlegging road. And, I went and found, the original font and design of the Tennessee Highway Patrol logo, because it's changed dramatically over the years, but I wanted to make sure that it was presented period accurately. So yeah, the amount of research that goes into writing a single page, at least the way I approach it, is pretty insane.
Yeah. And while you said it, most readers won't even see a lot of this stuff. I do think that they can sense that what they're seeing, there is a lot behind it, and which just makes it feel more real and solid. If it feels like the person that's telling the story really has a grasp on the periods that they're showing and whatnot, that does come through subliminally to the reader. So I do think it's a worthwhile effort.
I sure hope so.
I guess it's just up to you how much of it you want to do, I guess. So, but that's interesting. So you have this cult of Dracula, and who's the main protagonist of the story? Like, what viewpoint is this a multiple viewpoint story, or is it strictly through, is the main character called Lilith, or do you call her something else?
So the main character is called Dracula.
Okay.
And but Dracula is more of a title than a name.
Okay.
So it's more like queen or king or empress, along that lines.
Okay.
And staying true to Stoker's original form, the story is presented from multiple narrative points of view.
Okay.
We primarily focus on Mina Murray. She would be the closest thing that we have to a protagonist in the story.
Okay.
It is a broken narrative, so we do jump timelines quite a bit. It's Pulp Fiction was a very impactful film on my early development. So I love the way Tarantino presents that broken narrative where you don't exactly know when you are until it all makes sense at the end. So I tried to take that approach with it, and that was purposeful. One of the criticisms that the book has received, and rightfully so, especially in the first issue, is it can be a little daunting and a little confusing to the readers. It's a difficult book for people who are not familiar with the comic book format or who aren't intimately familiar with the world of Dracula. It can be difficult for them to pick up in the beginning. And that's sort of on purpose, because as I was researching different cults and cult leaders and how they operate, and I watched a lot of interviews with people who had escaped from cults and read a lot of articles written by people who had gotten out of cults and their family members. And one of the things that the cult will do, and this is true almost across the board, one of the very first things that they do is they completely cut the member off from the outside world. They bring them in, they separate them from any method of communication. The only information they get comes from the cult itself. And so it gets to the point where they don't have a concept of time, because time is an artificial creation given to them by their leaders. So I wanted to get a sense of that. I wanted the reader to approach Cult of Dracula as though they were an initiate being brought into the cult. And so in the beginning, I wanted to create this sense of confusion and not knowing where or when they are as they read it. And then as we go further through the story, just like when you get involved in a cult, you move up the ranks, more and more information is revealed and things start to make a lot more sense. So if the reader will then think back to the things they saw in the beginning of the book, they have a deeper understanding of the things that confused them in the beginning. But so, I want the readers to be a little bit confused, but I hope they're not so confused that they can't follow the story.
Right.
And that's a hard tightrope to walk.
Yes, definitely. So Cult of Dracula is how many issues?
So Cult is 6 issues.
6 issues,
and it's part of a 3-volume saga that will be 3 volumes of 6 issues each.
Okay, and why did you break the story down that way?
Well, one, I just thought it was really cool to have a horror story that was broken into 666. So for horror fans out there, it's kind of perfect. It's kind of purposeful that way.
Right.
But what I really wanted to do is I wanted to present people, readers, and horror fans with 3 distinct styles of horror. I'm an avid horror fan. I love horror. I remember as a 4 or 5-year-old child hiding behind my parents. They had this big black leather couch in their living room, and I would hide behind it and peek around the corner to watch Scooby-Doo, because Scooby-Doo scared me so bad I couldn't sit in front of the couch. And my mom, she would threaten, you're never going to watch Scooby-Doo again. I'm like, oh, please, Mom, please let me watch it. I promise I won't be scared. And so I have loved horror as far back as I can remember. And so I really wanted this Dracula story to be a love letter to the horror genre, and something that horror fans could identify with and respect and love, because horror fans are among the greatest fans on the earth. They love what they love, and they support it to no end. And so I wanted to I purposefully set out to give them something that they could identify with and embrace as their own. So I wanted to look at 3 different genres of horror. Cult of Dracula is a very Tobe Hooper inspired story. It's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It's very intimate. It focuses on a small core group of characters going through this terrible Southern Gothic experience. And then when we shift to Rise of Dracula, which is volume 2, and it comes out in January of 2022, it jumps into a John Carpenter experience where the world itself is sick, and the systems and the corruption has just seeped into society, and it's causing the world to just rot. And it's Rise of Dracula has been probably the most fun to write because it really becomes this terrible fascist story of, I mean, it's really, really cool. I can't wait to share it with people. And then when we evolve into Reign of Dracula, which will be the third and final volume that'll come out in 2023, it's a full-on George Miller, Mad Max, post-apocalyptic. The world is completely screwed Armageddon.
Wow.
And so readers will get those three distinct genres of horror.
Wow.
If they follow the saga from beginning to end.
Okay. And did you write all three of these out already, or you just have like outlines for the second and third arcs and you just did the first one in detail?
Mm-hmm. So Cult of Dracula, all 6 issues are complete.
Right.
And then I developed the outline for Rise of Dracula and Reign of Dracula quite a while ago, close to about the time I submitted Cult of Dracula to publishers for the first time. I was already outlining volume 2 and 3, and thankfully SourcePoint Press has been kind enough to pick up the options to publish all 3 volumes. So from there, I started developing. I went from a basic outline to a more detailed outline, and now currently writing issue 2 and 3 of Rise of Dracula, because for some reason I've been writing both of these scripts at the same time because I've just had ideas that fit better in 3 than they fit in 2. So I decided I'm going to write them all down, get that done. Right. And once I finish 2, then I'll be able to finish 3 pretty quickly. And then Reign of Dracula there's a very detailed outline for it, but I haven't started writing any actual scripts for Reign of Dracula yet.
Okay. So am I correct in saying, believing that because of the format of comic books, you really have to plan things out ahead of time? Like you don't pants these stories, or I guess maybe your outline might be like a roadmap for you, but when you're actually writing it, if you feel like it, you can deviate creatively, but you still have to get to a certain endpoint. Is that a fair assessment?
That would be a very fair assessment. Okay. When I was in school, studying creative writing, there's basically 2 types of authors. There's the architect and the gardener.
Right.
The architect writes everything beat by beat by beat and sticks rigidly to it. And the gardener has a basic outline, but if a flower wants to pop up over here, the character's going to go look at it.
Right.
I split the difference between the 2, because writing a comic book, you have to be devoted to a specific timeline, because you have to tell the story within a certain number of pages and a certain number of panels.
Yep.
And otherwise your publisher is going to yell at you. So I have to apologize to Josh Warner because I know I've caused him many headaches because I've just insisted. I need one more page, just one more page. And, but I've learned to be more concise, and I've had to cut some side plots and things that I really loved, but they weren't necessarily essential to the story, because I do have to get it in within the framework of what a comic book reader expects and what the publisher can do. So that's where the architect comes in, is having to stick to that rigid formula or structure. But I'm also of the mind that in order to create living, breathing characters that seem like they're actual human beings, you have to follow where they tell you they want to go.
Right.
To somebody, to people who don't write, that probably sounds insane. The characters are telling you where they want to go, but literally when I'm sitting here writing I'm having these conversations in my head in their voices, because I want them to feel like real human beings. One of the highest praises, or the praise I've been most appreciative of from the folks who have reviewed Cult of Dracula, has been how realistic the dialogue feels when these people are having conversations. It feels very real. And I'm very proud of that, because that's what I wanted to set out to do. I wanted to tell this story with real people, because it's more of a focus on the people than on anything else. And so I don't like to do a lot of expository writing. Sometimes comic books can fall into that trap where the character tells you exactly where they are and who they are and why they're here in like one thought bubble.
Right.
And that comes off as stilted to me. And I think again, from my perspective, for me, that approach doesn't work. I think there are better ways to do it. And sometimes that means I leave the reader with too many questions, but at least when they're asking these questions, they're asking them because they've been inspired by a character that feels real.
Right. Okay, that's all very fascinating stuff. And I have to be honest, I'm trying to wrap my head around all this research that you've done and how you distill that down and get it into, like, I don't know how many pages your comic books are, but that's quite a feat.
In total, the first 6 issues are going to be 132 pages in total.
Okay. So
that's for all 6 issues.
Right. So that's like, you're looking at what, roughly 21, 22 pages an issue kind of thing. So
yeah, usually 22. Try to stick to 22 if I can.
Yeah. So that's a pretty, and I know that the art and the dialogue or the writing try to complement each other, and they definitely don't want to duplicate each other. So it's an interesting challenge, a creative challenge. So I tip my hat off to you to be able to pull this off.
Thank you. It's hard. It's difficult. It's a challenge, but it's also a lot of fun, and it's very rewarding creatively. Right.
Yeah. And it's different from most writing because most writing is a solo activity. This one is very much a team effort. So that's
very much so.
Yeah. Very cool.
Yeah. This book would not be what it is without the creative team and the editorial team and the publishing team and the marketing team. I mean, they all work so hard to create and to market this book. And I'm so grateful to be working with SourcePoint Press and all the people that I've been fortunate enough to collaborate with on this. It's been an amazing experience, and it's something I never imagined I would be able to do. And sometimes I actually have to kind of pinch myself and think, like, why do I deserve to be working with these artists and these people? Because I'm nobody, man. I mean, I'm nobody special. I'm just a kid from Middle Tennessee. Yeah. No, there's no reason I should be having conversations with Shannon Mayer or Lucio Perillo or Ryan Kincaid or all these people Jay Ferguson, who have contributed, cover art, or Puis Calzada, Henry Martinez, who have done interior art. There's no reason that these people should even acknowledge my existence. But in some weird twist of fate, I'm working with these people and they're enjoying the process of working with me. And I sometimes I'm thinking, like, when we're having these conversations, I just want to say to them, do you realize who you are? Like, you are so much more important than me, and you're asking my advice on something. It's so surreal, and I don't know when my 15 minutes is up, but I'm going to enjoy every possible second of it, man. And it's so cool.
Yeah, it definitely sounds very cool. It must be all that research that you're doing.
God, I hope so. I hope it's worth it.
Yeah. So once you've completed this series, or do you have any other projects on the go at the same time, or is there something that you've got on your plate that you'd like to start after you've done Cult of Dracula?
Yeah, I've got a couple of irons in the fire. My primary focus is finishing Rise of Dracula and then Reign of Dracula. I want to make sure that I give this my full and faithful attention. I want to make sure I'm delivering to SourcePoint Press and to the people who are reading the book, the things that they expect and the things that they deserve. So I'm focusing very heavily on finishing those the best I can. We're also working on the film adaptation of the story. There's not a lot I can say about it at this point. The story has been optioned by Sure Pictures, and they're having high-level conversations right now with several horror-related streaming networks about bringing it to the small screen, which is really, really cool.
Wow.
So I'm working on that. And as far as future comic book things, I'm probably going to pigeonhole myself as being the Victorian horror adaptation guy, but at least people will know me for something. But I've had this really cool idea, or I think it's cool anyway, for a Frankenstein adaptation that I'm calling Prometheus in Chains. And it's set in the atomic age right after World War II, we've dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And Victor Frankenstein he was a prominent member of the Manhattan Project, helped create this bomb. He wanted to create a technology that could move humanity forward, but he really created something that's going to he believes is going to destroy the world. So the bomb is a metaphor for the creature. And then there's also another element where the creature is a metaphor for grief, and he's battling the stages of grief. And he, just like Victor Frankenstein in Mary Shelley's version is running from the monster, but the monster keeps pursuing him. Victor's trying to run away from his grief, but he can't get away from it. He can't escape it because it's going to keep stalking him and it's going to keep coming after him. So that's been a really fun story too. I'm in the outlining phase of that, and it's been very interesting. And I've got a very depressing story in mind called Billy Flynn's Long Goodbye. And it's about a guy also dealing with grief who he's on his way to making a life altering decision, but he has to get everything in order first. Okay. And so the ending, I don't think the audience is going to see coming, but it's very depressing, but also very cathartic to write, because I'm dealing with, with grief myself right now. My wife passed away in December of 2020.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Jeez.
Thank you. She was my rock and my inspiration. She is honestly, Amber, is the reason why people are able to see this book to this day, because I actually share this story in common with Stephen King. Because when my wife was diagnosed first with chronic kidney disease, I gave up on the project. I said, you know what? I can't focus my attention on this silliness. We have got to do everything we can for your health. And so I was going to abandon. I actually deleted it from my computer, and I didn't have a hard copy. I didn't have a backup. And Amber got so pissed at me. I mean, she was spitting nails, furious. She has never yelled at me like she yelled at me when I told her that I did that. And luckily, she had an earlier draft of the script and the outline that I had sent her in email. And she threatened me. She said, you were going to take this and you were going to finish it and you're going to see it through. And so I did, and I am eternally grateful to her for that. But without her, this wouldn't exist.
Wow, that's a very poignant story. Wow. Well, thanks for sharing that. That must not be easy to have to revisit all the time when you talk about this series. So
you're right. It's not easy. It's difficult, but I also see it as an opportunity. Like maybe someone listening can hear me tell my story, and maybe they can relate to it. Maybe they're struggling with grief. Because especially as men, we kind of live in this world where we're taught that you can't experience emotion. And so as a man, when you are experiencing grief and emotion, you sometimes feel like there's something wrong with you. Like, I'm not supposed to do this. So I know I have been very inspired by men that I have looked up to who are very open with their emotions and who are experiencing things like grief and loss. So hopefully, if I can be that for someone, and someone can say, hey, it's okay to not be okay, that is rewarding for me. And I really would love to be able to help someone like that. So it hurts to tell the story, but I'm proud that I am here and able to tell the story.
Yeah. Well, it's a nice legacy for your memory of your wife as well. So that's very touching. Thanks for sharing that. That's everything that I had to ask. Is there anything else that hasn't come up during the interview that you'd like to mention at this point?
I think we really covered everything pretty thoroughly, I think.
Great.
So, I'm excited for your listeners to be exposed to Cult of Dracula.
Okay, very good. Well, I really appreciate you coming on and sharing your story with us, and wish you all the best with the next couple of arcs of your series. And when something new comes out, and maybe we can have you on again to talk about it further.
Anytime. You send the invitation and I will be there. I've had a wonderful time speaking with you, and
Great.
I'm very grateful that you had me on.
Oh, yes, same here. Fantastic. It's always interesting to hear people's creative processes and life stories as well. So thank you very much for sharing.
Thank you.
All right. Well, you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to more stories from Rich David. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Bye-bye.
All right. Take care. Thank you.
Yep, you're welcome. Bye-bye.